2050's presentation. The chosen topic is leadership. The following are the group members involved in the making of this presentation. So what is leadership? Leadership is the ability of a person to influence others towards the accomplishment of common objectives without using formal authority. As Reverend Theodore Hesburgh poignantly put it, the very essence of leadership is that you have to have vision. It's got to be a vision you articulate clearly and forcefully on every occasion. You can't blow an uncertain trumpet. It is also important to distinguish leaders from managers. Differences may be regrouped into two broad categories. One is the approach towards the context, as manifested in the ability to set new visions, values, and policies, as well as in mobilizing resources. And two, the approach towards people, as manifested in the ability to get people's commitment through inspirational and persuasive methods. This is aptly explained by Warren Bennis when he states that leaders have the capability to conquer a potentially suffocating context, whereas managers tend to surrender to it. There are three main theoretical approaches used by researchers for understanding the leadership phenomenon, namely the trait, behavioral, and situational approaches. This approach states that leaders have certain innate traits that enable them to lead, such as assertiveness, dependability, persistence, and adaptability. It is also argued that a leader is made or broken based on emotional stability, the ability to admit faults and errors, intellectual strength, and having refined interpersonal skills and relations. Behavioral approach is a big leap from trait theory, in that it assumes that leadership capability can be learned rather than being inherent. This opens the floodgates to leadership development, as opposed to simple psychometric assessment that sorts those with leadership potential from those who will never have the chance. The situational approach argues that there is no single way of leading and that every leadership style should be based on certain situations, which signifies that there are certain people who perform at the maximum level in certain places, but at minimal performance when taken out of their element. We will now discuss the empirical evidence for these aforementioned theories. We have decided to use the great person theory to supplement our explanation of the trait approach. It was first put forth by Thomas Carlyle in the 19th century. He expressed the idea that great leaders have inherited qualities that allow them to shape society and define their era. That is, leaders were born, not made. One of the most prominent pieces of evidence of the connection between traits and leadership was provided by Ralph Stodgill in his two surveys between 1904 and 1970, which looked at a total of 287 traits. In 1959, using university students as subjects, Richard Mann examined the predictiveness of successful leadership based on 8 traits selected. And in 1986, Lod de Vega and Alliger used a meta-analysis technique called validity generalization and were able to identify the main traits of effective leadership highlighted in the previous studies. However, there are numerous limitations. Conclusions were qualitative and not quantitative, therefore many of the traits considered the most important for leadership are based on highly subjective views. There are inconsistent results in regards to the relationship between traits and leadership, which decreases the credibility of the findings and the great person theory itself. There can also be gender and race bias, as surveys were conducted during times when majority of leaders were male and Caucasian. Situational factors can play an important part in determining effective leadership, but are minimized in great person theory and trait approaches. The wide range of traits considered important for effective leadership reflects the inability for researchers to identify clearly the ones essential to the theory. Skinner's theory of behavioral modifications focuses on the idea that a leader's behavior is the best predictor of its leadership influence, and as a result is the best determinant of his or her leadership success. This behavior-focused approach provides real marketing potential, as behaviors can be conditioned in a manner that one can have a specific response to specific stimuli. As a result, we have gone from the supposition that leaders are born to the point that anyone can be made a leader by teaching them the most appropriate behavioral response for any given situation. The following are pieces of evidence to support the theory. The Iowa studies of leadership, which were carried out in 1939 by Lewin, Lippert, and White, and the role theory-based studies which looked at adopting different behavior as the leadership roles changed. Behavioral approaches, similar to trait approaches, fell out of favor because they neglected the environment in which behaviors are demonstrated. The hope of the researchers was that the identified behaviors would predict leadership under all circumstances, but this may be unrealistic. For example, what makes a high school principal effective on the job may be very different from what makes a military leader effective, which in turn would be different from behaviors creating success in small or large businesses. It turns out that specifying the conditions under which these behaviors are more effective may be a better approach. The path goal theory adds another dimension for analyzing situational theories of leadership. It states that a leader's effectiveness is a function of his or her ability to set attractive goals to followers and to facilitate the path towards the achievement of these goals. 4 styles of leadership are used in this model. Number 1, a directive style, focusing on tasks and rules as the motivators. Number 2, a supportive style, focusing on the relationship with the group. Number 3, a participative style, focusing on generation of ideals. And number 4, an achievement-oriented style, focusing on setting challenging goals. When the task is ambiguous and unstructured, the leader should adopt a directive style. When the subordinates lack confidence, the leader should adopt a supportive style. When the subordinates have ideals about structuring the task, or when there are disagreements, the leader should adopt a participative style. If the goals are not challenging enough to motivate the subordinates, the leader should adopt an achievement-oriented style. 2 models will be used as evidence for this theory. Hersey and Blanchard proposed that the effective leadership model is based on the work-related maturity of the subordinates. The graph below demonstrates the styles of leadership suggested for subordinates of differing commitment and competence. There are limitations, however. If the theory is only about getting those following to do work based on competence and willingness, then there may be some omissions, such as situations in which neither may be relevant. Wartime, emergency situations, survival-type scenarios may need a leader, and that leader may have to do more than simply look at the willingness and competence. She or he may have to make things happen regardless of these 2 factors. If the group already has an agenda, what the leader says or does may be less relevant. This is true when the leader may not have the support of the group or have deficiency the group has identified, making the leader less powerful to effect change. Fiedler's contingency model identifies leader styles and favorableness of the situation by evaluating 3 variables: leader-member relations, task structure, and position power of the leader. To identify the leader's style, Fiedler used a scale for measuring the leader's attitude by using the least preferred co-worker, or LPC, where a favorable rating for the least preferred co-worker by the leader is treated as an indication of a high degree of people orientation on the part of the leader. This model can be used to predict the effectiveness of subordinates. This model also has limitations. The vagueness of the parameters in the LPC scale makes them open to interpretation, and they are context-free. For example, supportive could mean anything. Giving criticism can be supportive, but in whose eyes? A leader who is egotistical may not see any criticism as supportive. As with any surveys, one must ask, how dynamic are they? Personalities and judgment of them can change over time and with circumstances. For our case study, we have chosen Barack Obama, the incumbent President of the United States. He's the first African American to be elected as the President of the US, and he adds a re-election to those credentials. He carries a wealth of experience, from graduating Harvard Law to winning a seat in the state of Illinois to his meteoric rise up the political ladder. He has made radical domestic policy changes, including equality for LGBT people. He signed the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009, which was aimed at helping the economy recover, and also passed legislation on radical healthcare reform. He's also made major foreign policy changes in ordering the military operation that resulted in the death of Osama bin Laden, has ended the US military involvement in Iraq, and has engaged in Iran nuclear talks. Overall, his leadership has helped propel his career in many facets and has ultimately led to his outstanding success as an influential figure. Even though we have presented 3 approaches to leadership theory, we assert that Obama belongs to a 4th approach, and that is of a transformational leader. Obama's transformational leadership was evident not only through the traditional characteristics defined and generally agreed upon by scholars, but was manifested in a unique manner, through his rhetoric. Obama's platform rested on the one-word slogans, hope and change. Change, of course, invokes the idea of transformation. This change triggered emotions, motivated and inspired Americans across the country to vote for him. There are essentially two components to a transformational leader. One, inspirational motivation. Obama has a clear vision, and he's able to articulate this to his followers. Obama motivates his citizens to believe America is a place where all things are possible, who still wonders if the dream of our founders is alive in our time. And number two is intellectual stimulation. Obama encourages his followers to explore new ways of doing things and new opportunities to learn. Quote, "Give hope to America," end quote. Obama's speeches during the presidential election period, as well as after he became president, are brilliant and impressive. He explored each of the four I's and gave hope and faith to the American people. He was very engaging with his audience as he tries to make connections with the American people to help motivate them to follow him. This is a classic trait and example of transformational leadership. He additionally comments a lot on his dedication to the working class, but also refers to the middle class too. This shows he is trying to appeal to the majority of the population. By relating to them and showing his commitment to them, he is making a connection. Also, the fact that a speech took place in Martin Luther King's church is a symbolic and very influential factor. It portrays a sense of relationship towards MLK, and also dedication to the issues he fought for. This may influence people that have a connection with MLK, which by extension is a large part of the American population, to transfer that connection towards Obama. In conclusion, this presentation has defined leadership and helped differentiate between leaders and managers. We then analyze the three approaches: the trait, behavioral and situational approaches. Models were then used to describe each of the above and critically evaluate them. Finally, we used Barack Obama as our case study to describe a transformational leadership approach as the one that best describes him. The following are the references used in the making of this series, thus signaling the end of our presentation. Thank you for your attention.